When a major software vendor announces that they're sunsetting the system you use, they're not informing you. They may be manipulating you. That announcement is engineered to create panic. Panic makes you rush. Rushed decisions benefit one party, the vendor. Right now, tens of thousands of government agencies are being told that their SAP or Microsoft Dynamics systems have a deadline. Most will fall for it. They'll skip due diligence, sole source to save time, and sign contracts they'd never accept if they weren't terrified. Here's how to see through it. Let's look at what's happening right now in the market. SAP ECC has a deadline of December 31, 2027. That's the deadline SAP has set for ending mainstream support for ECC 6.0, the system that tens of thousands of organizations have been using for over a decade. After that date, no more security patches, no compliance updates, no bug fixes. Except here's what they don't emphasize. SAP has already moved that deadline. It was 2025, then they pushed it to 2027 because customers weren't moving fast enough. And if you commit to their cloud migration program, you can get extended support through 2030. And some customers have quietly negotiated to 2033. Those are the ones that have signed up for RISE. The firm deadline has moved a few times, and it'll move again if enough customers push back. Let's go to Microsoft Dynamics GP. In September 2024, Microsoft announced end of support for Great Plains in September 30, 2029. Security patches are available until April 2031. Again, this sounds scary. End of support in 4 years. But that's 4 years. And security patches for another 18 months beyond that. That's over 5 years of runway if you don't panic. And here's the pattern. The vendor announces sunset with urgent language. Sales teams immediately start calling. We want to help you transition. Early adopter incentives expire soon. If you commit by Q2, we can guarantee your implementation slot. Listen to that language. Incentives, guarantees, deadlines, all designed to compress your decision timeline. Meanwhile, analysts are reporting that fewer than 40% of SAP ECC customers have even licensed S/4HANA, which is their cloud latest product. Gartner said in late 2024 that they see little evidence of the acceleration of migrations needed to meet SAP's 2027 target. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the market isn't really panicking. The sophisticated buyers, the ones who've seen this movie before, are taking their time. The only ones rushing are the ones who don't know that they have options. So what does end of support actually mean? Let's try to demystify this. When a vendor says end of support, most people hear the system stops working. That is not what it means at all. Your software doesn't expire like milk. The database doesn't delete itself, especially if it's in your data centers on your premises. Transactions don't stop processing at midnight on the deadline date. What end of support actually means is no more security patches. The vendor stops fixing newly discovered vulnerabilities. No more bug fixes. If something breaks, they're not releasing updates. No more help desk. You call support, they tell you your version is unsupported. No more regulatory updates, tax tables, compliance changings. You're on your own. What it does not mean is that the system stops functioning. It doesn't. You must migrate immediately. You don't. The world ends on the deadline date. It doesn't. Now, is running unsupported software risky? Yes, it's not ideal. But it's manageable. It's a manageable risk for a manageable time period, especially if you have compensating controls. And keep in mind, you always have option 3. You can go to the market and pick something else. The question isn't, should I eventually migrate? Of course you should. You need to modernize. The question is, who controls the timeline, me or the vendor? If you understand that end of support is a risk inflection point rather than a cliff, you can make rational decisions instead of panicked ones. And here's something vendors definitely won't tell you. Extended support is almost always available. SAP offers it through 2030, with some customers getting to 2033. Microsoft and Oracle have similar programs. You also have third-party options that will keep your programs running forever. Here's a pattern I see constantly with these forced migrations or sunset notices. An agency, let's say running ECC, gets the sunset notice, early 2023. They got the message, support ending December 2027, 4 years out. Sounds like plenty of time, right? Except what happens is, then the salespeople show up. The system integrators, the resellers, they show up with math that is designed to terrify. And the conversation goes like this. S/4HANA migrations can take 18 to 36 months for organizations your size. If you start now, you'll barely make it. If you wait another year, you're going to miss the deadline. And if you miss the deadline, you're running unsupported software with security vulnerabilities and compliance gaps. So If the IT leadership does the mental math, 36 months for migration, it's already 2023. That puts us at 2026 at best, cutting it close. Instead of realizing that 36-month estimate is for organizations that are slow and careful, organizations that rush it could do it in 18 months. Of course, rushing is exactly what causes implementations to fail, but the vendors don't mention that. They'll recommend a special program that takes you there quickly, sign here now, right? We can have you fully transition before the deadline. If you commit by end of Q2, we can guarantee your implementation resources. And so there's more artificial scarcity. Guarantee your resources, as if the vendor would turn down a multi-million-dollar contract if they waited another quarter. So what happens is organizations panic. They have conservative councils that hate to take risks of unsupported software. And sounds like something that would end up in an audit finding, right? Nobody wants to explain that to the county commissioners. They'll sole source and say emergency modernization to address vendor mandated deadline. And they justify it as operational necessity. So what happens is they'll sign a contract to modernize with an 18-month timeline. But here's what typically happens. By month 6, they're already behind. The data conversion is complex. Older instances of especially SAP are so customized to the client that they're not apples to apples migration, even to S/4HANA. So integrations with other systems don't work, and in testing, you keep finding problems. So to hit the timeline, what would typically happen is phase 2 becomes a dumping ground. Reporting is pushed to phase 2, advanced procurement 2, budget analytics pushed to phase 2, training gets crushed, and they've planned. So anyway, they go live in a couple of years ahead of the timeline, and it's technically a success, except month-end closing, for example, takes 3 times as long as it did before. Department heads can't run reports because reporting is in phase 2. Purchasing is back to running spreadsheets because their workflows were not set up. And 6 months after go live, they're still in crisis mode because phase 2 has not started and nobody's talking about it. So here's the part that really stings in those failed migrations and panicked migrations. There's another option, right? You're the same size city. There's another option. You could take a different approach. You start evaluating. You don't rush. You don't fall for the sales tactics. You run a competitive process. You do a needs assessment. See if this platform works for you or not. Look at what options you have available to you, and then pick an option. And sometimes that option can be running a competitive process, releasing an RFP based on the needs assessment. Because when you implemented that older system that is being sunset, your processes were different. The technologies were different. So what you need to do is figure out what your options are and which one you're going to take. So if you're going to the market to pick a different product, you need to negotiate extended support to give yourself runway, right? So when you're implementing carefully with proper change management, project management, plenty of time with no crisis, you can do this right. You can have completely different outcomes and not just panic and go live with something that is about to be sunset. So the difference between the two approaches is that one agency lets the vendor control their timeline. The other control it themselves. Now, let me tell you about how savvy technology leaders handle the same situation. I've worked with agencies that took a completely different approach. A city running Microsoft Dynamics GP that handled their sunset announcement completely differently. In September 2024, Microsoft announces end of life for Dynamics GP. Support ends 2029. Security patches ending 2031. The IT director had been through this before. Earlier in her career, she had watched an agency panic and make a terrible decision. She had learned. So her first move was to read the actual announcement, not the sales pitches, the actual Microsoft documentation. What she found is that after April 25, no new Great Plains perpetual licenses will be available. April 2026, no new subscriptions. December 2029, end of support. April 2031, end of security updates. So she did the math. It was September 2024. She had until December 2029 for full support, 5 years, and security updates for another 16 months beyond that. 5 years is not an emergency. 5 years is a normal technology life cycle. Her second move was to assess what end of support meant for her specific situation. GP wasn't internet facing. It sat behind their firewall, accessed only internally. The security risk of running without patches was real but manageable with compensating controls. They had a stable, mature implementation. Not a lot of bugs. Their IT infrastructure was solid. The system worked. The risk of something break-in that they couldn't fix was relatively low. So the conclusion that she came to is that if they had to run unsupported for 6 to 12 months, it wasn't catastrophic. It was elevated risk that could be managed. So her third move was to set her own timeline. She calculated what her organization actually needed. And what she came up with, they needed 6 months for a proper evaluation. Maybe they'd go with a Microsoft product, maybe not. 18 months for implementation, realistic for their complexity, 6 months of buffer, 6 months for proper evaluation. Maybe they'd go with a Microsoft product, maybe not. 18 months for implementation, realistic for their complexity and size. 6 months for buffer, because things always take longer than planned. So in total, 30 months, she had 60 months before support ended. She had twice the time she needed. There was zero reason to rush. And her fourth move was to run a real procurement. She didn't sole source. She didn't assume Microsoft's successor product was the right choice just because they were already a Microsoft shop. She evaluated through an RFP process Microsoft Dynamics, Tyler Munis, Acumatica, two other platforms. Real demos, real RFPs, real requirements, real reference check, real cost comparison. By the way, if you want to learn more about reference checks, click on this video. She discovered something interesting. One of the competitors was significantly better for her specific use case, municipal government finance, than what Microsoft was offering. And it was less expensive over 10 years. She would never have discovered that if she had panicked and sole sourced. Her fifth move was negotiate from strength. When Microsoft's partner came back with, but you should stay in the Microsoft ecosystem, she had data. Well, we have evaluated alternatives. Here's what we found. If you want our business, here's what it would take. They negotiated a better deal, not because Microsoft was feeling generous, because she had leverage. She was willing to walk away, and she had other options. The implementation starts next year. Go live is planned for 2027. That still leaves 2 years of runway before support ends. And she's bought extended support to 2030 just in case. No panic, no crisis, no regrets, just good planning. The difference between these patterns isn't resources. It's not technical capabilities. It's not budget. It's mindset. On one hand, you accept the vendor's manufactured urgency, and the other pattern recognizes it as a negotiating tactic and respond accordingly. Here's your framework. 5 steps when a sunset announcement arrives. Step 1, don't react. Pause. The announcement is designed to trigger your fight or flight response. Resist. Schedule a meeting for 2 weeks out. Use that time to gather information, not make decisions. And remind yourself, this is a sales tactic dressed as a notification. Step 2, read the actual documentation, not the sales pitch. The official end-of-life policy. What is the real timeline? When does support actually end? When do security patches stop? What extended support options exist? SAP ECC's mainstream support ends 2027. Extended support is available through 2030. Third-party support is available forever. If you want to learn more about your options, click on this video. Some customers have negotiated to 2033. On Microsoft Dynamics GP, support ends 2029, and security patches are available through 2031. The real timelines are usually longer than the panic suggests. Step 3, assess your actual risk. If you run past the deadline, what happens? Specifically in your environment. Is the system internet-facing? What compensating controls exist? How stable is your current implementation and your infrastructure? What's your tolerance for elevated risks? For most organizations, running unsupported for 6 to 12 months is elevated risk, not catastrophic risk. Step 4, set your own timeline. Calculate what you actually need. You need a proper evaluation to find out what your options are. Running through a procurement cycle, time that out. Buffer 4 to 6 months. Implementation, training, planning for a new ERP implementation, not just a panicked jump towards whatever new is being offered. And add it up and compare it to the actual deadline. If you have more time than you need, and you probably do, use it. Step 5, negotiate from strength. Never reveal internal panic to the vendor. Have alternatives. Even if you plan to stay with the current vendor, evaluate competitors. Leverage creates better deals. Get extended support in writing. It's almost always available. They just don't advertise it. And like I said, there's third parties that'll do it for you. So control the timeline, and if they want your business, they'll work with you. Next time you get a sunset notification from SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, whoever, don't panic. Pause. Read the real documentation. Assess your actual risk. Set your own timeline. Negotiate from strength. The vendor is counting on you to be scared, Don't give them what they want. And you can always call us to do a needs assessment on your existing environment. So tell me in the comments, have you been through a sunset situation? How did you handle it? Thank you for watching. Remember, sunset announcements aren't notifications, they're sales tactics. The deadlines are softer than they appear. Everything is negotiable. Extended support exists, and you have more leverage than they want you to believe. If you want more on vendor pressure tactics, not just sunsets, but the full playbook on vendor management, click on this video.